I'm really excited to welcome all of you to our Change Management in DesignOps event, where we are going to speak about the way how change management is done. And today we have really amazing speakers. Let's meet and greet each other. Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself to the community?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm super excited to chat with you all. I am Rachel Posman. I'm currently a Senior Director of Design Operations here at Salesforce. I think like many of us, I came to DesignOps in like a very meandering path. I was a professional ballet dancer early in my career, ended up going to school, back to school for business, but knew I wanted to apply it in like a more creative space. Having come from like ballet, I was very much passionate about the arts and craft and all of that. So wanted to apply design, business in design spaces, and ended up working in various kinds of design ops roles before it was called design ops, project management in design agency. Then moved in-house. I was brought on by Kristen Skinner when she was building her design ops team at Adaptive Path, that then got acquired by Capital One. So I kind of kept growing there, looking across service and experience design teams. And then I was brought on at Uber Eats to stand up a design ops and research ops practice there. And then I moved to Salesforce, where I have built out what we were calling team ops. We're now calling it central design operations, but this is kind of our horizontal team that supports all of design, specifically our 400-person product UX team, but then we also do a lot of stuff for our 1,000-person global design team as well. So we work across all of those teams. Yeah, so I'll save some more about specifically what we do for later, but that's me. Oh, and I'm in San Francisco. Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for sharing your amazing profile here. I've been following you for a long time, so I'm your fan. Great, thank you for joining. Johnny, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, similar to you, Farid, I'm also a huge fan of Rachel, so I may be a little starstruck in this session, but I'll try to get over myself. But yeah, just really thankful for the opportunity to be part of this. It's really good to be able to join the community as part of the speaker panel and not just in the audience for once. My name is Johnny. I'm originally from Denmark. I've not lived in Denmark for over a decade, so my accent might be slightly out of touch, but there is a Scandi in there somewhere. I am currently onboarding as this title here. It says Head of Design Ops. Sounds a little bit fancier than it probably is. It's a team of one at the moment, and so I'm building out a team here over the coming years, hopefully. I'm previously kind of bounced through a few different careers. I'm originally a design student and dropped out of art school many years ago, and accidentally ended up working as a front-end engineer for about 7 years, and always really kind of focused on the design aspect of front-end engineering. I love the transition. I love the composition of things, making design through code. So that was my way into that. After some years, I decided that it wasn't really for me. I've kind of grown out of my passion for coding, I guess, and it became a lot more structured. And because I don't have a degree in anything, it kind of became a little bit too complicated for me. So I ended up managing the team that I was working in as a project manager. And yeah, that's about 12 years ago. And I've kind of taken that path ever since in program management, all in kind of the agency space. So yeah, design ops as a title is fairly new to me. Only for the past year or so, I've kind of used that as a thing. But I think, yeah, I've probably have done it for over a decade in reality. So it's just finding my feet in the in-house space. So yeah, and I'm based in London. That's me.
Great, thank you very much. Ellie, would you like to go next and share and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Allie. I am based in New York, if the view of the brick wall didn't give it away. I have been working in various forms of kind of creative operations for about the last 10 years. Originally, I also went to art school. I was a photographer in another life and came into kind of production and operations through marketing and campaign work, and then eventually got into branding and design. I've worked at companies as big as Airbnb and Apple, to small, tiny branding studios based in Brooklyn. I've been a contractor, I've been full-time, I've been at agencies, I've been in-house. So I've got a lot of very interesting experience across a lot of different kinds of teams and a lot of different work streams. So while I am somewhat new to the Friends of Figma and speaking, and I don't have a whole lot of content to share with you all yet or resources, it is something that I'm working on, and I'm excited to be here and a part of this community. I am happy to chat through any on the ground, in the weeds questions about how to apply some of these processes in your projects on a day-to-day basis, some of my own tips and tricks, and just kind of a way to lead with empathy and curiosity when you're dealing with change management.
Great, thank you. By the way, I'm a fan of Loom as well, so thank you for joining.
I am too. I adore Loom, and it is one of the best products that I've found in my kind of stack when it comes to tech. But I'm actually leaving Loom in about 2 weeks and transitioning into a new role. So it's exciting times, but also very sad times too.
Great, thank you for introduction. Yeah, and my name is Farid Sabitov. I'm leading DesignOps chapter at Friends of Figma and working as experience consultant, focusing more on DesignOps at EPAM. So great, so let's start. What is our goal of today? Our goal is to show how you performing change management inside your organization. By the way, we already had our first session about the DesignOps introduction, and really like the diagram that Z shared with us around how she is doing the DesignOps, what's her DesignOps approach inside her organization. If you want to check it out, there's a YouTube file, and also in our Friends of Figma DesignOps chapter page, you will be able to find the FigJam file itself, where you could inspire and it might spark some interesting ideas in your head when just going through the materials that people shared. Great. Just to get started, I would like to ask Rachel. Rachel, what is your definition of change management? How you feel like it should be done?
Yeah, I think it's really just the way in which we kind of move from here. Let me pull over a little diagram to start. It's the way in which we move from our current state to a desired future state. And so how we drive that, how we implement those changes, the tools, the processes, et cetera, we use to do that. I'll tell a quick little story about what this is showing and kind of how I came to my current approach. But probably 3 or 4 years ago, I went to a conference and sat in on a change management session. And I started to have these light bulbs go off in my head that there was part of this process that I was totally not thinking about in the way I should be thinking about it. So if we think about moving from current state to desired future state, there's kind of 2 pieces of that puzzle. One is the technical side, which I was like, yeah, I got this. I know how to do a project plan. I know I have an MBA in design strategy. I have all those tools. I can take big problems and break them down. I know how to roll things out. But then on the flip side of that equation is the people side. And I did not have a structured approach to do that. So what I'm going to share later, I think, is more of the structured approach to the people side of that equation, which I think is something that people kind of, at least I did. I was kind of winging it or thinking like I was doing it, but not doing it in an intentional way. And so it became really important to me to think about how we kind of give the same attention, empathy, et cetera, to that people side, which is such a huge part of change management, which we all know, but maybe aren't doing in practice. So long answer to your question, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for sharing. For me personally, I really like the diagram that Z shared with us. And personally, I have some gaps in the measure phase, but would love to know if how others are measuring their results, their changes. When we are implementing such changes and scaling them, are you performing any measuring through some kind of surveys, or how you are making sure that the change was adopted well and it was helpful for others? Ali, Johnny, would you like to answer that?
I'm not sure I can answer it because I think similar to you, I probably have a big gap here, but I think the way I like to think about change, like philosophically, is always like, have I improved someone's life through some kind of change and through managing difficult times? So I think for me, it's usually qualitative through conversation, trying to capture any kind of like state before you make change, like depending on what the change is, like trying to figure out like what is it that we're actually trying to solve, and then post that process, like what have we actually done to move that needle, and what impact has it made on people? Because yeah, similar to Rachel, it's like the people is front and center for me when it comes to change management. And yeah, I have a few models that I can pull over from the other Figma when relevant. But yeah, the measuring is difficult.
Yeah,
I don't have an answer. I just have.
Yeah, maybe we could like come up with the answer today. Maybe someone else. I see that Z joined us as well. Z, if you have something, please share. Yeah, so Johnny, you have really great materials here. Would you like to share your story with the community around change management?
So yeah, I think as we were talking, as kind of running up to this event today, I realized how little I actually do think about change in kind of a processed way. I think it's something that I naturally do, but because I come from an agency background where this isn't necessarily part of like every day, because change is something that's quite rapid and you just have to deal with it as it comes up. So being in-house for the past year or so, I've started to kind of shape up these things that kind of follow this change curve here, which is one out of many models that I found online that kind of aligns to how I like to think about it. So again, it's like a people-focused change curve that is apparently a well-known model that I didn't know about, but it's kind of what I do. So you kind of think about like the point of where you start to introduce the change, and there's a process before, which I think in the double diamond process you showed above there from C, kind of shows that, yeah, you're in preparation for the change. But when a change actually hits someone, like what is it that actually happens emotionally? Like you go into this kind of potentially shock and maybe denial of like how this is going to make things difficult for you or make things different, and you don't understand. So like the fear of the unknown kind of kicks in, and you go in, you become frustrated. You might actually be depressed at some point. So like trying to manage people through this curve here, I think is the most important part that I've found. There's all the different aspects of making the change happen, but I think like being able to proactively help people survive these stages of the change curve, I think is super important. And that's kind of how I like to think about it at the highest level, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you. Oh, I see that people also adding some materials. Yeah. Please do that. It's really great. And also, if you are the author of this slide, please add your name in the corner, so people, if they will have some more questions, they will be able to contact you. Thank you, Johnny. And I saw like you had others as well, like for early adopters and innovators. Would you like to share that right now? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let me copy that over as well. So I'll just dump it all in. We can talk through it. There's nothing precious here. These are just kind of things that I've thought about in preparation for this. So another thing, and this comes down to like how I think about like rolling out change, especially if it's planned change. I have an example later where it's more of reactive change, from like working through a reorg where the change is happening to me as well as everyone around me. How do we take control of that? But if you're fortunate enough to be able to plan through the change, like understand and build a vision for the change and help build that out, like how you kind of use the adoption model to build out your change from like a very small group, because the thing about change is you don't want to change everything at once, and you don't want to change everything for everyone at once, because then you end up in a quite chaotic situation. So you try to roll it out like anything else, like start small. So this kind of model is just kind of a visualization of like how you take maybe a small change in a small group, test that out and build it out before you start to roll it out. And then at some point you hit the chasm, which is essentially where you start to build. Hopefully, if you're successful in your change management, you start to build demand. Like other people are seeing what you're changing and they want the thing. So if we can get to that point, you start to see the success of the change management. So the sooner you get to like having demand of what it is that you're trying to roll out, then you can start maybe adding more things to the change. So if you have multiple steps of the change, then you can start rolling out again another small change in addition to that, again with a small group. So you kind of stagger in on a sequence of change throughout like your organizations or your teams. But the key is to get to the point of demand.
I just wanted to read a message from Melissa. This is a model that I've often used with teams to help them understand that change is a process that has a predictable emotional component. Great. Really like it. Thank you very much for sharing.
Cool. The last one are just principles. I think probably Ali has something very similar, I think, and also Rachel has, so I'll leave the floor open. But yeah, there are some key principles, and they're kind of what we've talked about. Like there needs to be a strong why, so that people understand why we're changing things, so that they can understand the how, and the impact on them. And that how is always different for different people, for individuals and for different teams. So like just having enough time to build on the why, I think is quite valuable. And then it's like change impacts different people differently. I'm kind of referring to the change curve. Like you might have people that are already kind of gone through the dip and are trying to experiment and trying to solve things, where some other people might be kind of lagging behind. It takes them longer to get through that curve and they might be stuck a little bit. So like being able to identify that in different people, just helping them out, I think is really valuable, and a few others. So
great. Ali, do you have anything to share, or would you like to give some feedback on the things that we discussed before?
I do. So I think I'm very similar to Johnny when it comes to my approach to general change management and production, and just kind of operating from more of a philosophical place rather than a systematized, like this is our process and we have to do it, steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in that order and no other way. Because I've worked on so many different teams and across so many different kinds of projects, and I've often been the only design ops person, I also end up being the account manager. I end up being the strategist. I end up being sometimes the marketing manager. And so having to think through all of these different kinds of roles and hats that I have had to play, it has given me a lot of empathy for anyone who flags a change. And I think oftentimes when you're in the thick of it and you're in the project and you're in a good zone and you're making progress, and then all of a sudden someone's like, hold up, we've got to completely change what we're doing. Stop what you're doing. We got to scrap it and start over. I feel like, to Johnny's point, the immediate reaction is often denial, anger, even depression sometimes, of like, why am I doing this? This is so much wasted work. And I know that the people who raise those flags and request the changes are usually coming from a place of more knowledge than what the rest of the team has. So now, knowing that, I like to ask very digging questions, and not in a way that's challenging or being like, tell me why we need to make this change, like justify your request. No, like tell me why you think what we had originally talked about and the scope we had originally agreed on is no longer serving the goal that we're all trying to work towards. At the end of the day, we're all trying to do good work. No one wants to ship bad work. No one wants to feel bad about what they're working on and spending their time doing. So no one's going to raise a request or a change, usually without reason. And so I like to ask a lot of these questions. And some of the ones that I tend to default to are these. And it's more from, what prompted the need to change? Like, when did this come in? Like, where did you identify this need? What about the goals have changed, and what part of our strategy no longer works? And once you kind of have that background information of where they're getting all of this, you can then figure out a plan to move forward. Then you can start negotiations around scope, around timelines, around resources if you need it. You can figure out the best way forward, because ultimately we all just want to do good work. We're still kind of kindergartners sometimes that want to put our best drawing up on the fridge. Like, we don't want to ship anything that we're not proud of. So I think keeping that in mind when going through change management and not letting yourself get defensive or feel like it's an attack on you is always very important.
Thank you, Maria, for sharing your notes about importance of empathy. Thank you very much. I just wanted to go back into the measuring part. Z gave us some feedback here. Measuring is hard. Sharing a resource here, not just about DesignOps, but also about design leadership. Made to measure, getting design leadership metrics right. Thank you, Z, for sharing. Great. And we also have another material, Share Up, Stop Running in Circles and Ship Work That Matters by Basecamp. Thank you for sharing. And please add your name if you share this material, so again, people could like refer to you and ask some questions. Great. I see that, Rachel, you have tons of interesting materials. We'd love to spend more time with you and like go into your slides that you've prepared. Would you like to share your story on the change management?
Sure. I first want to share this quote that I think is like it boils down like what I think change management is so well, which is, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men, people, to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And I think that is like the key to change management, is like the desire to make that change. So I love that quote. So this is what I'm sharing here, is kind of a model that I was talking about earlier that I learned about, that is really not focused on that people side of the equation. So it's a structured approach to really think about what behaviors are needed to move people from current state to future state. And so it's part of this bigger process by I think it's pronounced Proci, but it's called ADKAR. And it represents A equals awareness of the need to change, D equals the desire to participate in the change and kind of build that momentum to pull people out of that steady state. K is about knowing how to change. So that's like your understanding the change, ability to implement required skills and behavior. And then R is reinforcement, to sustain that change. So these are the 5 outcomes that people need to achieve for a change to be successful. And they're kind of part of this overall 3-step process that's part of this, that's prepare, manage, and reinforce. But the way that you should look up this process, there's a ton of info on the internet about it. It's not mine, but I think it's a really helpful one. But the way I always see it is in this linear approach. So step by step by step. And the way that I have actually found it to be used in practice is more iterative. So things like on our team, our DesignOps team, we own our UX competencies, right? Like you were talking about earlier, Farid, about competencies. This is something we own. So each year we do a refresh with that, which means that there's kind of a new rollout that needs to happen, some new changes that need to happen. You know, we might be partnering with HR in a new way, recruiting in a new way. Managers might be needing to do different things. So each year there's kind of changes to this process. So I kind of like to think about this as a more iterative approach. So each change requires some of these steps. And so like you mentioned, Ali, like I don't think I'm not like every project we do has to follow all of these steps. Like in a lot of ways, this is aspirational, but I do like having like that framework or like that structure that I can always refer back to. If I'm like, ooh, this isn't working so well, like what did I miss? Oh, I forgot to tell people why we're doing this change, right? Which is so important in that desire part of the equation. So this is the kind of general framework that I use, and I can share, you tell me, Farid, if you want me to share kind of more specific things, or we can do that later around like tools and things that you can use that align to each of these. This is the kind of process that I really like to refer back to in my approach on our team.
Yeah, for sure. You have tons of materials. We can go through them one by one, and people could ask their questions in the FigJam file directly and share their feedback or share additional resources, so we can all collaborate. But please take your time.
Okay, I won't go into like all the details. I mostly created these for like leave behind, so you can dig deeper and kind of, you know, explore at your own pace. But I'll just kind of explain what this is. So this other doc or slide I just shared, the left side are levers. And so those you can think about as tools to actually enact this process or activate this process. So there's different things like a communication plan, a sponsorship roadmap, coaching plan, training plan, and resistance management plan that all are tools that you can use that kind of ladder back to each of these steps of the process. So you can see like communication really is about awareness, desire, and reinforcement. And so there's different things you can do for each of those. So some specific things I'll call out, like lessons I've learned. I think early on in my career, I thought, okay, if I just communicate that things have to change, like good. I've kind of done the bulk of it, but communication does not equal change management, and it's just part of the process. I think another part of that communication side is that we've all realized now that with so much going on in the world, like this appetite for change it changes over time. And so we have to be really cognizant and respect what's happening, what the context is around that change. And like, is it the right time to make this change? Is there like smaller steps we can make toward a bigger change later that will respect people and where they are in this moment? And then for some specific things my team has done on the communication side is, I think that have worked well for us is I actually have I feel like it's I'm so lucky, but I have a designer on my DesignOps team, and they are responsible for creating really well-crafted communications. And I think this is a huge part of making the comms part of it successful, in that we're not just sending these kind of like ugly emails that get lost in people's inboxes. Like, they're well curated, well thought through. There's like diagrams and visuals that help people really understand the new changes and the process of those changes. So I know it's not possible, headcount's limited for everyone, but like, if there's anyone on your team that has design skills, I think really utilize those in the way that you're presenting design changes, design ops changes. Another learning is around the sponsorship side of it. I think this is another one that I think early on I was like, oh, I got to do all the work myself, right? Like, I have to go talk to every single person about this change. And I kind of thought like the burden fell on me to really do all of this change. But there's two parts of this plan that really lean on other people, and that is sponsorships and coaching. And the coaching is around how managers get involved. So sponsorship is huge. So in my org, we often lean on our head of design to communicate like these changes. And you know, one message from him is worth like 1,000 from our team sometimes, because they get lost in the noise. So he will say, you know, here's a new change. We'll include a slide in our town hall for him with talking points. And wow, it's so much easier than me just kind of, you know, scrambling to every person individually or something. And then another side of that is coaching, which comes from managers. People in research have found that people want to hear directly from managers that a change needs to happen, to know that it's actually important to them. So utilizing our UX managers' Slack channels with sharing resources, sharing information about change coming early is a big one for us. Training, of course, is a huge part of what we do, enablement. And that something we need to always keep in mind is that training does not equal desire, right? So you tell people how to do something, it doesn't mean they're going to want to do it. So you always have to start with the why early on. And people digest information really differently. So we always try to offer multiple ways to consume the information and, you know, to learn about the change, how to make that change. So we do things like Slack. We utilize Slack with like tips and quizzes. We do something we call Know and Grows, which are kind of like lunch and learns or learning sessions where we do some more in-person virtual training sessions. We have playbooks where we codify things in more written formats with diagrams and things, so people can kind of, you know, learn how to make those changes in their own ways. And then finally, resistance management. You really thinking about like early on, before you even make this change, how are you going to get in front of it? So like answer those questions that make people scared from the beginning. And so you can utilize your DPM network to understand like early grumblings or early signals about what might people be worried about. You can join leadership meetings to give them a heads up early on, and you can host AMAs, Ask Me Anythings, or office hours along the way to just help people kind of get past those fears. So that's kind of like some practical ways to apply and to tools and stuff to apply that ADKAR model.
I love the communications and also the coaching aspect, because like people want to know and people want to be in the know. So like the sooner you get it and from the closest person to you that you hear the information, like the more trust that information holds. So yeah, I really like that. I haven't actually thought about it. Like when I was reading this earlier, I was like, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense, because like philosophically, like it answers so many of those kind of like empathetic aspects of change, like where you can really help the person,
Yep.
the individual. So I think, yeah, the whole thing about educating and teaching like other people to kind of manage to change with you, and also the sponsorship, I think is super important as well.
Yeah, I think trust is really that thread there of like, you know, in an organization as large as ours, like we don't individually even know each of our designers, which I would love to, but that's not possible, especially in the remote world. So like the trust maybe isn't as strong as it is with the managers, right? So that's the person that should be communicating some of those bigger things.
I absolutely agree with that. I feel like most of my job in DesignOps is usually relationship building and trust building. And by having those relationships in place and keeping them healthy and making sure that everyone understands intention and that no one is trying to make their lives harder, that then when these changes roll in, whether that's at a project level or an organizational level, team level, it's a lot easier for people to trust you and realize that there will be a clear and actionable path forward with the least amount of thrash possible. And I feel like trust really is the core to that, the foundation of that.
I think it definitely depends on what the change is. So there's a model, I think I shared like a maturity model up here somewhere. And so depending on like where design is in that maturity model, there might be different things that are important to them, or challenges they're facing, or things that, you know, fires they're putting out. And so I think the change approach, resistance management, is really just it still boils down to what's important to the people, what's causing them fears. And so those fears might be different as the maturity of the team changes, but it's really still about relating to them as humans and communicating and helping to kind of decrease those fears with the ways that you're approaching the change.
Yeah, I would second that. I think the approach I would take, regardless of maturity, would be the same. Like it's the kind of emotional attachment that you have to your current state. The model that you had before, Rachel, about like, yeah, you move from current state to future state. It's like the current state is different, right? But like going from that to something else is a journey, and that journey is different from different people, different teams, depending on what it is. So like, I think, yeah, the maturity, I don't think is, for me personally, it's not something I would consider as part of like the management of change. I think it's more about like understanding like what are we going from and to, and then managing that with the people that it impacts. So I think it's all contextual in that way.
Great. So let me also share some of the materials that I prepared for the session. I'll just paste it at the bottom here. So we had our first intro event with Z, Patricia, and Dominic around the DesignOps introduction. And I've shared my way of doing DesignOps, and like this is like pretty much like change management is one of our main skills, right? So that's why it's like pretty much the same approach could be applied into the change management. But here I wanted to show more detailed and like some practices, and maybe some of these ideas will spark some new ways of doing things in your organization, in your team. So that's why we'll love to share. But also, if you feel like sharing something, please do that as well. So the approach here is pretty simple. So it's assess when we are trying to understand the current situation within the team, discipline, or organization, optimize where we are coming up with some approaches, with some hypotheses, how we would like to solve this specific challenge that we faced with, and trying to test that with specific teams. So the same thing as we had in product design, in design thinking, before delivering features to our real customers, we want to validate that with the specific focus groups. The next one is called scale, when we understood that specific new practices are working and we are ready to scale them. and the different approach there on like how we could do trainings, how we'll do some internal events, how we could create playbooks, how we could do some other things is a part of the scale. And the last one is automate. And this is like the thing that I'm always trying to add into our DesignOps industry, that real value of DesignOps and operations as well, I believe, is to create scalable systems and scalable frameworks. So that's why I'm not saying that designers should code or DesignOps should like create plugins, extensions, and automations, but I'm saying it's about like the importance of trying to think about like, is there a way, is there something that we could like make it simpler, make it more automated without supporting that manually for over and over time. So here at the bottom, the same phases are just mapped within some of the slides prepared here, where on the assess phase, we are trying to understand and create awareness around like current challenges that we have. So as an example, I will take integrating designers into the product management and engineering world. If designers are tracking their work as a part of different issue tracking systems like Asana, but engineering is using Jira or other issue tracking systems, there is a problem, right? We are disconnected. So that's why the first step is to create awareness, conduct workshops, do some one-on-one interviews, and gather all this feedback around what kind of challenges the current team or practice or discipline or organization is facing. The next one is during the assess phase is finding the right people who are interested to join the smaller focus group to try and solve this problem altogether, because DesignOps is not one-man show, right? It's all about doing things. It's a team effort, do things together. So that's why you need to find people who will love to join the forces and try to make these changes all together. So within this time, it's important to think about like the team compositions and understand which kind of teams do you have and which of the teams could be early adopters. So I really like the slide that Johnny shared with us here around the early adopters and innovators. So when we are trying to make changes, it's important to try to do that with early adopters or with the people who are passionate about solving this problem. Again, if we're speaking about Jira, if they already had some experience, this is great. We do the testing on them first. And here on the next slide, by trying and practicing and gathering the feedback around the new ways of working within this early adopters team, we will able to like, again, solidify our approach. And again, it's not about creating rules. It's more about creating aspirational guidelines for people who are struggling. And it's, again, one of the other things is about change management that I believe is that it's like we shouldn't convince everyone to change. Sometimes it should be open. If people want to change, they will follow your practices if they are good. If they are not good enough, they will not follow the process. So that's why within this way, we will able to get a more feedback. And here on these stages, if we are speaking about the Jira, some steps like environment preparations to creating your own issue types, workflows, and other things that will help this early adopters team to go into and like start testing and like validating some of the hypotheses. The next one is finding design evangelists of specific change. So if we're speaking about Jira, or if we're speaking about moving into new tool, or if we're speaking about better and more advanced planning practices, finding this evangelist is key for changes, because they are the ones who will share and will scale the same things that you came up with this early adopters team to others. So that's why when you will have these team compositions, you will able to create a change plan around, okay, team A will love to start testing the new approach within like after 1 month or a couple of weeks based on the like level of changes, right? We could understand and plan who will be the next to try adopting these new ways of working. And by visualizing the team compositions, by having this change plan, you have the roadmap of how these changes will be scaled through the whole organization. But during this step, it's really important to, as a design ops or product ops or any other ops, it's important to be a part of these other teams, focus teams who are trying to adapt new changes that you came up with the early adopters team. So that's why it's important to attend all ceremonies that they have, attend retrospective sessions that they are sharing all the notes about the new ways of working, and also documenting as much as you can. Again, by the way, I'm a fan of Atlassian products and Coda. So in Atlassian, there's also plugins that will help you to see how many pages of your new documentation parts of the process were visited the most. So you could also measure some of this feedback at this point as well. I'm a fan of maturity models. Thank you, Rachel, for adding this. Your slide, by the way, I'm a fan of yours as well. But speaking about maturity models, this is really interesting part for me personally as a part of the change management, where you could visualize all the 5 levels and you can do the self-assessment of specific teams around specific topic. So here's the example of the design system maturity model, where for the level 1 we have UI kit, design library, design system, scale design system, and public design system. And for each of these things, you could have like specific checkpoints and ask teams to self-assess themselves if they strongly covered this specific thing or partially covered or not covered as well. And also when other teams are sharing the feedback, by adding all these checkpoints in the maturity model, you will able to show like, okay, here we are on the level 2, but we would like to be on the level 4. Here are the missing points that we need to implement to be on the level 4 of maturity model. Office hours is really great and like was really like important for the part of the process when you are on the scale. So when you already have some things around like Jira or something else, asking design evangelists to conduct office hours is helping others to ask the questions and like do things during the call and ask any questions like and share the feedback. It's really helpful. And as you can see here, integrating practices into governance models, ceremonies, checklist templates, or other things, and documenting is a part of this scale phase. Measuring results, again, I know it's like always challenging. It's based on the goals, it's based on the context, but again, it's important. One of the easiest way to measure that I was able to find, like by speaking with other people, is just by conducting surveys with understanding the current satisfaction level of specific challenge. And after implementing such changes in like 3 months or 6 months, you will be able to do the same survey and see how you changed. Because sometimes changes could make things worse. So that's why it's important to measure and make sure that like we are going in the right direction. And also conducting some internal events. Rachel mentioned around town halls or lunch alert sessions where people could share their successful case studies and stories about like how they moved into Jira, and right now they can see and plan the work ahead of time and have more integrated workflows with engineering and have more traceability around all decisions that have been made. And the last part that I always, and I would love to, like, I will always put more focus on, like, and we'll try to add more of that into our design operations or product operations, is to start thinking about automating, because this is like truly one of the things that could help us to scale things to the within the whole organization. I'm really excited and like inspired by examples of Pinterest, how they develop their own products. For example, around Lottie, they had a challenge with how to handle the animated graphics to engineering team. And so that's why they created their own tool that helped not only to simplify the process, but also like scale that to the whole organization, but also scale that to the whole industry. So again, we'll love if more organizations will invest more into design automation parts, because that not only helping your organization, but also helping others to do things at scale by automating some of the routine work. So yeah, this is my story. Rachel, Johnny, Ali, would you like to add something?
Yeah, that was what I was gonna say. +1 to like how we can continue to do that design operations, I think is huge. I did a fun exercise like at the beginning of the pandemic, actually, with our team, thinking about the future of design operations. I wrote a blog post about it, but we were basically writing postcards to our future selves of what our world looks like and our role looks like. And so much of it was automated so that we could like zoom out and focus on more of the strategic stuff around our roles, which we all really love to do. So I try to do these, you know, I'm not super technical, but I always look for ways to kind of decrease steps and utilize the same stuff over and over. So love that.
Thank you.
I think there's a lot of opportunity to create, like even from current tools, to create dashboards that can kind of move you towards that. So some things that we've done is just to create like simple dashboards in Confluence, just pulling in certain things from Jira just to kind of like take away some of the necessity for communication so that we have like a self-serve approach to things. I think that's kind of moving into the automate stage. But I think it's not something I've done a lot of, because I think there's, for me personally, in my journey, that's something it's quite far out, but it's something that I definitely would aspire to work towards, because it's the holy grail as I see it. When I saw your kind of approach here, it's like, yeah, this resonates. This is great.
Thank you. And also, Z shared with us product engagement model works for change management as well, where we have informed, involved, and core teams. Wow. Yeah. Interesting part about informed, right? So how we could inform our partners about the changes. So if we are making changes like to our Jira process, we also need to make sure that we communicate all of that to our partners as part of this informed level. Thank you, Z, for sharing.
If you think about any change, it's kind of an initiative, and you can think about it as a program of work, right? So you have your core team, you can build a RACI, you can do all of those things like around the change if the change is big enough and it's worth. So yeah, I think this is really cool. I haven't thought about the engagement model, but yeah, it actually, yeah, you're right, it works.
Rachel, you had more slides that you wanted to share. Would you like to go and share that with the community?
Sure. I just summarized some of kind of like my key learnings into principles, I guess, of design or change management that I try to live by. Some things that I try to keep in mind. So I think that change management should be values driven. I think it's our responsibility in design operations to really align our orgs with our organizational values and our personal values. And sometimes that requires big shifts, right? So it's intentional kind of change management is essential in guiding people down those better paths, which we all want to do in our organizations. Another huge one is that it should be inclusive, and that if change is healthy, then it should be a two-way relationship. And we really must consider like diverse perspectives of our teams, of our users, in order to inform really responsible change. People first has come up a lot. We can't lose sight of those individuals. Like in organizational change is an accumulation of individual change. And then intentional, like I mentioned before, I was kind of winging the people side of it. I didn't have a structured approach. And so I think somebody was like, well, there's a ton of approaches. Like, what do I do? Like, I think the important thing is really to like pick one that resonates with you and just have that as your backbone, and just be deliberate about it and purposeful about it, so that you're not winging it, so that things aren't kind of getting along the way. So those were kind of some of my key takeaways, I think, for change management.
So I'm just like going through the board and trying to find, maybe people shared some questions. Do we have any questions in the chat? Maybe people use Bevy for asking questions. Can anyone see that?
Elizabeth, I'd love to hear about the specific mechanisms, tools for working through the change management. I see people in practice having so many ways of doing it. I think we chatted a little bit about that, and that there's like so many of these great approaches and frameworks and things, and that it's more important to just pick one that resonates with you and kind of anchor it to it, be intentional about it.
I can answer, like, I believe in like design ops and product ops and other operations. Like one of the main tools is Excel, but there are more advanced tools rather than Excel files. There are tools like Notion, Airtable, and Coda. Personally, I'm a fan of Coda, where you could just create multiple tables with the people, connect them with the right teams, connect with other information around like deals that you're using, or the communication plan, that is all the ceremonies that you have within your organization. So yeah, and in Coda you could visualize things around like what will be your change plan, and you could also capture some of the feedback. Most importantly, in this kind of like Notion, Airtable, and Coda tools, is that you can connect different tables, different data points, and have this more holistic view on the things. And if we're speaking about the changes, you could capture their team compositions, the change plan, some feedback, some insights, some learnings, and also links to all the playbooks materials or Confluence pages where you documented everything in full details, or resources that people share that might be helpful for the specific activity during the process?
There's another question here, if we have
Yeah.
time for you, that got a couple of votes. One is, I'm struggling to be able to measure impact, and one of the challenges my team suffers from survey fatigue. Any advice on how to collect baseline data before and after implementation without surveys and without taking up too much time on everyone's calendars? This is definitely one problem that we struggle with as well on our team.
I think a way, just reading the question, I think what I would probably do is start with a hypothesis. I would almost take a product approach to this and start with a hypothesis and then try to prove it either wrong or not, just to measure against something. And that way you can get off the ground really quickly. You may not be right, but like, we should also just assume that we're never really right. Like, we're just doing something. We're trying to approach something with all the knowledge that we have. And if we don't have the luxury of a lot of knowledge or a lot of data, we can hypothesize based on our knowledge that we sit on. Because as DesignOps, we're always listening to what's happening on the ground. That's part of the role, right? So we probably have a reasonable idea of what's a good idea to start with. And then if we're wrong, well, we've learned something, right? So that's probably how I would tackle it.
We also definitely have issues with survey fatigue on our team, and so something that we always are experimenting with how we can collect this information, but we're trying to look for ways that is automated again. So looking at just things that are easily captured by, like Google Meet, you can see how many people attended, so you have a bit of a signal around engagement. You can also look at how many people engaged with materials you created on Google and on our internal site. Quip has some of that as well, that we can track just usage around our materials a bit. And then like in our newsletters, something we're going to be trying to do is try to build in a survey right there at the bottom that says like, was this helpful? Yes or no? So that there's not like additional places you have to go. So like meet people where they are. If there's an event that people already are in Slack, like put the thing right there in Slack, like make it easy for people to give you information versus some big, robust, long survey that's taking a lot of time. So like one question in Slack, how's it going? Great. Those kind of things are what we're moving towards versus these like very in-depth surveys that people don't have time for.
Great. So I believe we are out of time. Thank you very much for joining the session. I believe some of the materials could spark some like ideas or new ways of thinking inside like your day-to-day work, and will help you to evolve your DesignOps career. So, and thank you for other listeners who shared a lot of interesting resources and links to the materials, to articles. So this is all great. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you very much, Rachel, Ali, and Johnny, for joining the session and speaking and sharing your story within the community. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Take care.